And I made a very deliberate decision to join the EFF and not to join the MK party. Pursuing our ideals singularly, not with the intention to save the ANC. The amount of money that was used to attack the EFF during this campaign was incredible. Actually meets all the criteria of being a South African citizen, and she's perfectly entitled to participate in this contest.
Join us in supporting the Springboks when they take on the All Blacks at Ellis Park on the 31st of August 2024. We will be hosting exclusive hospitality at the Ellis Park Arena. Our hospitality includes pre-match analysis by international rugby players, lunch, drinks, Category A tickets inside the stadium so that you can enjoy the game right there. After the match, we're going to have live music, more food, more drinks, exclusive parking. What more could you want? If you want to join us and bring any size group, get more information below this video. Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham. And as always, on the State of the Nation, we're going to make two pleas to you. One is to like and subscribe the channel if you enjoy it, and the other is to support Pace Car Rental that helped to keep us on the air. Go to their website, use the code SONA. It will be in the details below, and you can get a discount when you next rent a car. South Africa is a movie, and there are many actors in the movie, and one of the critical players on the South African scene has been the economic freedom fighters. And joining me today for, I'm very happy to say, the third time, is Mr. Niehaus, recently newly minted Member of Parliament for the Economic Freedom Fighters. Carl, welcome back to the State of the Nation. Good to see you back here.
Thank you, Mike. When you were saying that you want people to like two things, I was hoping the second one was me, but perhaps that's a bit of a high order.
Come on, man, let's like Carl. Put it in the comments.
Thank
we
you.
Like Carl. But Carl, so it's been an interesting time. We sat at the beginning of the year, beginning of 2024, when we discussed, at that point, it hadn't been that long before you had made the move to the EFF. And we were talking about EFF policies, basically what turned out to be the EFF manifesto, which I think that was about to come out just as we were talking. And all the talk was about the forthcoming election. There were murmurs about Mkhonto weSizwe at that point in time. This was just following the announcement that Jacob Zuma was involved, but you had joined the EFF. I know that you've got a historical connection with Jacob Zuma, and there were one or two comments passed that maybe you joined the EFF too early, right? What do you make of Mkhonto weSizwe from your standpoint?
Mike, you will remember from the previous interviews that you actually asked me that question. And I said, look, I knew very well that the Mkhonto weSizwe party was going to be launched when I decided to join the Economic Freedom Fighters. And I made a very deliberate decision to join the EFF and not to join the MK party. Now, I don't think we need to go into the details of that discussion again, because I, at length, explained why I made that decision.
Yes.
My view now is that Mkhonto weSizwe party had done exceptionally well during the elections. They are now the official opposition in the National Assembly. They are clearly a progressive party. And I believe that the Economic Freedom Fighters, Mkhonto weSizwe party, ATM, and some of the other smaller parties on the left progressive spectrum of those who are in Parliament, making up just over 100 members of Parliament, can play a very significant role to present the progressive agenda in the National Assembly, and also to play a very important oversight function for this coalition that there is now between the ANC, primarily the Democratic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus, and then a few other smaller hanger-ons. I firmly do not ascribe to the notion that this is a government of national unity. I don't think it is. It is simply a coalition, and the main coalition partners are the ANC and the DA. I've been long enough in politics to know what happened with the first government of national unity. I think one can describe that first government of national unity that was formed after the 27th of April 1994 on the basis of that interim constitution, can describe that as having been a government of national unity. And then, of course, the ANC was still truly a majority party, because it managed to garner in the elections of 1994 62.8% of the vote. Now it is, yes, still the largest party, but definitely not the majority party. So the ANC cannot say that it worked from a basis of strength and power to establish this coalition government. It worked from a basis of weakness. They got a massive knock. They lost 17% of the vote. They lost 171 MPs. Now, in any democracy, one would say this is an absolute rout against a governing party. And I still continue to remain surprised to see Cyril Ramaphosa still as president of the ANC and president of the country under those circumstances. He has presided over the largest decline in popular support for the ANC that one can imagine. And I think in any other representative democracy, he would have had to take his jacket and go.
Carl, you mentioned that, and it's been said on many places, including by Helen Zille, that this isn't a government of national unity. The question is, does it matter whether you call it a government of national unity or a coalition? What's the difference?
No, it does matter, because it's all about the kind of messages and perception that those who are in this government, and especially the African National Congress, want to convey. Ramaphosa wants to wrap himself in the mantle of Nelson Mandela. He wants to tell us that this is now a government of national unity representing everyone, as the former government of national unity at least had some claim to make.
Yeah.
And that is not the case here. This is a government of a coalition which is formed between the ANC and primarily the DA on the basis of a very simple fact, that the ANC lost its majority and needed, if it wanted still to be part of government, to join into a coalition. That is the fact. That was not the reality. Those were not the facts for the government of national unity that was formed in 1994.
Yeah, because I suppose by calling it a government of national unity, and certainly the way that President Ramaphosa has behaved, it's like, out of the goodness of my heart, I'm letting these other people in.
But well, in he's actual not fact, out of the goodness of his heart. He's doing it because he's got no other option.
Yeah.
The government of national unity in 1994, you could have said, look, it was magnanimous of the ANC and of President Mandela to have agreed in the interim constitution to create the environment, to bring in other parties and to form a government of national unity. Yeah. Because on the basis of the 62.8% that the ANC garnered in that election, it could have governed on its own.
Yeah.
But here the ANC can't govern on its own. It's impossible. And you see, I don't think the ANC psychologically has adjusted to this reality. Because the last day in Parliament before we went on recess, we had to go through this farcical rigmarole of the chief whip of the ANC insisting that Parliament must still refer to him as the chief whip of the majority party. And we said, but you are not the majority party. You're simply the chief whip of the largest party in the National Assembly. Yeah. We then pointed out that the Chief Whips Forum, where the Speaker is also present, had actually accepted that fact. and that this must now be gazetted and put into the rules of parliament that he's simply the chief whip of the largest party. No, he said, it's not yet gazetted, therefore I insist on being called the chief whip of the majority party. Now, you see, you can laugh about it, but there's something more about this. It's the ANC who has not had the penny dropped for them, that they've lost power. And that they can only govern now with the assent and consent of other parties, which is going to severely influence what policy positions can go through in this grand coalition.
Yeah, it's a majority party for people that can't do maths, right? But because
it's not the majority party, sweet and simple.
Carl, we've got a 30% pass rate, so pass mark, so then it's a majority party. But anyway, Carl, let's deal with, okay, so the elections happen. Cyril Ramaphosa presides over the biggest loss ever for the ANC and puts them...
almost the biggest loss, I will say, in many democracies in the world. It's a massive loss.
It is a massive loss. And, you know, it's even worse if you know, once again, if depending on how you do the maths, you could make the loss even bigger if you take it as a percentage of their loss. It's about a 1/3 loss.
Exactly.
Right? But they weren't the only party to lose support. The EFF also lost support. Now, I know that many people watching this will know that I'm not the biggest fan of the EFF's policies. I'm not a fan of the fact that your commander-in-chief said he was going to come onto the show, and an hour before the due date decided not to come on the show. I've issued many invitations. I'm saying this just so people I can set the scene. It's not that I'm trying to talk behind anybody's back here. I would love to have senior people from all the parties here, but the EFF chose not to honor the invitation. But
just to say, look, I'm sure there were good reasons for that.
Look,
and I don't think it would have been a deliberate standing up or rudeness towards you.
But the point I'm trying to get across is that even though I'm not part of your target market, and I do have a platform, I do want to hear from all the parties, and including the EFF. So just so that everybody knows that, so that we don't see in the comments.
Settle down to do that now, because you've got me in the seat.
We've got you in the seat, and you're here. But now the EFF did. There were great expectations before the election. Even many analysts and commentators saying that the EFF could even dislodge the Democratic Alliance as the official opposition, right? I think at that point, not too many people got MK's performance right. So we do understand from whence it comes. But nevertheless, the EFF, with very vocal support, lots of online support, especially in the Twitter space, manages to lose support. What happened that the EFF lost that support?
Let me take you through what I think are a multiple of reasons. But let me first of all say, I believe the EFF ran a very professional campaign. Very, very together, very well planned. The attendance at our rallies were outstanding. And what you say about social media is correct. The EFF is probably the political party in South Africa with the best social media team.
You'd win every election on Twitter.
Well, I don't think so, because of the counterattacks that we are being faced with, and especially because of the negative publicity that comes against us in the mainstream media. But the EFF developed a strong social media presence and a very professional team specifically to try and counter some of those problems. So nothing wrong with the professional way in which we campaigned and conducted these elections. But we were under severe attack. The amount of money that was used to attack the EFF during this campaign was incredible. The amount of small political parties without really any base that were set up and funded by white monopoly capital, by the Oppenheimers specifically, and when we refer to the Oppenheimers, we will of course talk about all these captains of industry. that put in so many money and effort into fighting the EFF. I remind you also of what Helen Zille herself said, that the main enemy is the economic freedom fighters. So we faced a massive attack, a wave of attacks. We didn't get a good media. The media was fundamentally, in the mainstream media, biased against the EFF. I can do that analysis for you. Perhaps at a different time, in a different interview, we can go into the factual detail of how negative and how prejudiced the mainstream media was against the EFF. Now, still under those conditions, we managed to hold our own. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is, of course, none of us fully understood what is going to happen with regards to the MK party, and especially the kind of support that the MK party was going to garner in KwaZulu-Natal, but also other parts of South Africa. It did well in Mpumalanga, it did well in parts of Gauteng. So obviously, part of that support, which previously I think was borrowed, especially in KZN, to the EFF in the local government election, where we grew well during those elections as the EFF, and it gave us a lot of hope about further growth. That support was not hard, solid EFF support. It was protest support against the African National Congress. And when the MK party emerged, especially on the back of the extraordinary popularity, especially in KZN, of President Zuma, that borrowed opposition support to the ANC that went to the EFF, now went to MK party.
And to be fair, it also hurt other parties like the IFP.
It hurt other parties. I think originally we perhaps underestimated the extent to which it would also hurt the EFF. But it had shown that that is the case. Then thirdly, I am still convinced that this election had huge irregularities. Those irregularities have been pointed out, but we in the EFF have decided that we were going to move on. That the irregularities we addressed, we called them out, but at the same time we believed the country needed to move on. And unhappy as we were that we believed that quite a lot of our vote was stolen, we were prepared to work for the bigger good of the country. So I think all of those three issues that I raised with you combined in us losing roughly 1.4% of the vote. So it wasn't a massive loss. It registered a blip on the radar screen that we were declining a little bit. But I don't think this is going to be the trajectory that we see from hence on. The EFF is going to regain whatever the small amount of loss is that we've registered. We are going to play a very significant role in the opposition benches during the next 5 years. We are going to call out this so-called government of national unity. And we're going to highlight the fundamental contradictions that there are in this coalition. I don't believe that this coalition will last for a full 5 years. In fact, I'll be surprised if in a year's time, if you invite me here to come and talk to you, the coalition still exists in the form that it exists now. Now, the EFF is part of the Progressive Caucus in Parliament. We issued a very important statement on our intentions of holding this coalition responsible, doing our oversight work, but at the same time coming forward with a progressive program of action that we want to push, the kind of legislation that we want to see introduced, issues around the old apartheid laws that still sit on the statute book, obviously the issue about return of the land to the people, expropriation of land without compensation, the Africanization of our legal system, all of those issues, and I'm sure you've read that statement by the Progressive Caucus, which is a very important manifesto, and gives us the blueprint of where we want to go in the next 5 years as opposition. But we may not even find ourselves to be in opposition for those 5 years. Because I want to take you to a very significant document that was released by the EFF under the name of our Secretary General, Commissar Marshall Dlamini, just 2 days before Cyril Ramaphosa announced this bloated so-called GNU cabinet. And the EFF said, look, we've negotiated in good faith with the ANC about the possibility of a coalition with the progressive forces, where we believe the ANC, ourselves, MK Party, ATM and others, can be included in a progressive coalition that will garner a majority. And we made it clear that we were doing so on principle, not looking for positions. That document is there. It's on the table. It's still relevant. And if this farcical coalition that at the moment is stumbling along breaks, gives in under its own weight and its own contradictions, there is still a chance of a new coalition of the progressive left to be formed, even on the results of the election of the 29th of May, that we can form and move forward.
I mean, I certainly read that letter. I read it a couple of times and have perhaps my own view on the interpretation of that. But I want to pick up on something that you've mentioned a few times. You've mentioned progressive, a progressive caucus. Now, how can you describe the policies that are espoused under that progressive caucus as being progressive, where you are taking away civil liberties, where we are turning our country back to what you and I lived through as young people, where certain people wouldn't have property rights, they wouldn't be able to grow wealth. You would have a government that Pretoria shall decide. That is surely the opposite of progress.
Now, you see, Mike, we've had this debate in 2 previous interviews when I was sitting in this chair. And my problem with the way in which you interpret the issue of expropriation of land,
it's not just expropriation.
Yes, I'll come to the rest. I disagree with you how you understand that. And I explained in the previous interviews how nationalization of land certainly doesn't take away someone's property in terms of having a house and residence and being able to utilize land. But I've read the manifesto, and
your manifesto says exactly that.
We've explained it in very clear terms. Why nationalization of the land is necessary in order to have the effective utilization of land and address the injustices of the past and the way in which the majority of Black and African people have lost access to the land, and why land is such a critical foundation for the building of an economy where the majority of South Africans, African and Black, are being empowered. So, you see, you may have a particular view about that, and I have tried to ameliorate that view and explain to you that it is not simply, even like the headline that you gave to one of my interviews that I did complain about it. When you said, look, be happy, but you'll lose everything. That is nonsense. It is not true. It is also not true that we intend to take away the civil liberties of people. But what we do believe in very strongly is the important role of a national government giving direction to the economy, helping to create an economy that will grow and that will empower the majority of people in this country. And we believe government has a central role to play.
So do you not think that the people are mature enough or competent enough to manage their own lives? The government has to manage it.
No, it's not. You see, that is again a misrepresentation. It is not about whether people are competent enough to manage their own lives. The fact of the matter is that you have huge business interests, big companies with massive power. That power needs to be managed, that power needs to be controlled so that it doesn't just subject people to the super exploitation of the capitalist system. That has got nothing to do with trying to say we don't respect people's ability to think for themselves. Of course we respect that. We also respect that people can say, but we need, because we can think for ourselves, because we can see what is happening to us, because we can see the super exploitation that we get from the capitalist system, we need a counterbalance that will help to protect us. And government is that counterbalance. Government can play that role. I sat here in this very same chair in one of the previous interviews and explained to you the role that state-owned enterprises played in the past under the old National Party to uplift the majority of white, working class and poor. And I said it is a tragedy that that role that state-owned enterprises should be able to play. For now, the whole population in this country, and very specifically for those who were the exploited under the apartheid system and the repressed under the apartheid system, that those state-owned enterprises are now being chopped up, are being privatized piece by piece, and it removes that ability of government to intervene in order to help to address the poverty issue, the massive inequality, and the problem of job creation in South Africa.
Now, Carl, you mentioned going into the election that the EFF ran a very well-organized campaign. The messaging was there. The manifesto was, I think, if you add the pages of all the other manifestos, it doesn't come to 50% of what the EFF put out there.
EFF's manifesto was 265 detailed pages.
And I've got to tell you that I did read all of them.
Well, I'm glad that you've done so.
But something then, if the campaign is good, something is not landing, right? There's obviously a policy issue. And we've discussed, whether people over there, the land one is emotive and that'll always get a lot of column inches. But there's the big issue of immigration. And, where the EFF stands. We're seeing the current controversy around a girl who's seemingly born in South Africa, but because she's got a Nigerian name, people don't want her to participate in Miss South Africa.
Which is outrageous.
It's
and
terrible.
Entirely unacceptable.
Yeah. But
because she actually meets all the criteria of being a South African citizen, and she's perfectly entitled to participate in this contest.
But now, in South Africa, there seems to be three schools of thought on immigration, if we want to call it that. One is the traditional immigration is good for any country as long as it's done through the proper channels. Another one that says immigration is bad, don't let anybody in. And one that seems to be the EFF position. To be fair, it's changed a lot. I do remember at the start of 2022 when suddenly the EFF was going around restaurants checking the identity of waiters and waitresses, which was quite enthusiastically, despite the fact that...
But that issue is contained also in this last manifesto, which you said that you've read all 265 pages.
What I'm saying...
It does refer to the need for South Africans to be given proper employment, and that you cannot have the illegal employment of people when they are not registered in terms of the various laws of the country. So the EFF has always been clear about that. But what the EFF has been saying is that we have the ideal of a pan-Africanist development, both in terms of getting rid of our borders, but also to develop a pan-Africanist united economy, because the strength of such a united economy will indeed be immense. So those are the ideals that we have set out. But we have never in your wildest dreams, preached illegality. We've always said the laws must be implemented. If the laws needs to be changed in order to meet this ideal that we stand for, a pan-Africanist ideal, then so be it. But as long as there's legislation on the statute book, it must be implemented. And if we disagree with parts of that legislation, obviously we need to deal with it through the legislative processes.
So let's just say the ANC took you up on your progressive caucus idea, and you go into coalition with the other progressive movements. I've had MK on this platform who said that they are straight out xenophobic. They want everybody to go back, right? Now you're going to go there. South Africa, we do understand, because of the support given by the ANC, by Julius Malema of Robert Mugabe and the people that have followed him in Zimbabwe, South Africa is sitting with millions of illegal immigrants. Now, if the EFF was in power, would they apply the law and return all of these illegal immigrants from South Africa?
Mike, obviously, we do not believe that the unemployment problem in South Africa is because of immigration. It is because of lack of economic development. Obviously, the Economic Freedom Fighters is a party that stands for the opening of African borders and the growing of the African economy. So while there is legislation that, as I've just said to you, one would abide by, one is not going to promote that kind of approach. You're going to promote an approach of open borders, economic growth, a continuing solidarity and working together of African countries with their huge mineral resources and all the possible benefits that there is from that size of an economy grown in the African context. We often refer to the European example, where you can move from one country to the other even without having to show a passport at a border post. You can this morning be in London. Okay, London is now no longer part of the EU, but let's say in Brussels. And this afternoon you can be in Berlin, and you are able to move around, and there is a strong facilitation of work, of business, and of pleasure. So this is the ideal that we will work towards. So obviously to say to us, you will strongly and very insistently try to implement a policy of just pushing people who are in South Africa and who may not at this stage have South African citizenship out of the country, that's not going to be our first priority. Our first priority will continue to be to grow this unity amongst the people of Africa and this strong, united economy.
Now, we do know that...
And that will obviously, sorry, I don't want to talk over you. That will obviously also influence the way in which we approach these issues in any coalition. That is just a reality, because that's what we stand for. And it is clearly explained in our manifesto. Now, let me just say one more thing, because you said, obviously, there's something that lands about policy not well, therefore we didn't get the support. I think that is a simplification of the reality. The reality is that we are faced with a massive campaign against us, also a massive misrepresentation of what our policy positions are. We had misrepresentation about what we actually mean by expropriation of land without compensation. We had misrepresentation, which our commander-in-chief had to go into great detail in a couple of the major rallies that we had towards the end of our election campaign, especially about this issue also of open borders, of migration, etc., etc. We have misrepresentation about how we want to form alliances also between the private sector and a strong government. On all these levels, if you just go and read Business Day or some of these newspapers, you will not get the real policies of the EFF. And that is a serious part of the problem, why to use your words again, policy doesn't land and doesn't resonate because the policy is not presented through these major media channels, which does have an influence on perception and how South Africans think because of misrepresentation.
But surely the readers of Business Day, to use that example, are not your target market. They're not the people that are going to vote for you. Anyway.
All South Africans are our target market. Obviously, the main people that we address, that we want to see their lives changing, is the majority of Black and African people and working class people. The EFF is a party of the poor. It's a party of the workers. It's a party of the unemployed. But we do reach out to everyone. But you know as well as I do, Mike, that when you switch on your television tonight and you sit at 8 o'clock and watch the news, that news doesn't just go to the so-called readers of Business Day. It goes throughout the country, everywhere, and it influences everyone's views. E-News, ENCA, has got a massive negative attitude against the EFF. We know because we have journalists who come to us who say that the news editor tells us to do X, Y, and Z to put you guys in the worst possible light. I had journalists coming to me saying, Mr. Niehaus, we would love to interview you, but our news editor has given us an instruction not to interview you. Now, you see, this is the kind of problems that we are faced with. And eventually, in the case of ENCA, we had to take a decision. We are now not going to go to them and not participate in the interviews and in news events with them. Not because we want to be anti-freedom of speech, but because their behavior is fundamentally anti-freedom of speech and biased. And this problem is a serious problem which our society has to address, because we are not allowing people equal access to get their information, their views, their policies across. And the EFF has been at the worst receiving end of this kind of negative propaganda. And I repeat to you again what Helen Zeller said, because Helen Zeller's attitude is reflected in ENCA, is reflected in many of the other media outlets. They don't see the EFF as a party to engage with on a fair basis. They see the EFF as enemy number one, and that's a problem.
Well, maybe that's a real feather in your cap, because if they see you as enemy number one, it's got to be for a reason. So,
but it does create an uneven and unfair playing field,
yes,
which I think is a problem, and we need to talk about it.
I fully agree. Carl, let's talk about some of the internal, not internal situations. We do understand that the roots of the EFF, quite simply, are deeply within the ANC. Right, that is kind of where the EFF emanates from. You know, I've always said that that the idea of getting the band together again is a preposterous idea, because generally when people leave, they leave. Right, they leave for a reason, and it's like anybody who's got an ex-wife out there, she's probably the person least likely to be your ideal roommate.
Yeah.
So, you know, this idea of parties getting back together again. Do you think there's any thing to be said on this? Do you think it's something that could happen? You know, you're in a unique position, having spent your life in the ANC, moved to the EFF with deep connections to Jacob Zuma. Could you see the band getting back together again?
You see, I think because of that unique position that I'm in, I'm able to understand these issues quite well. It is true that the EFF has strong roots in the liberation struggle ideals that also informed the formation and part of the historical existence of the African National Congress. That's true. And that's why the EFF often will refer also to a seminal document, such as the Freedom Charter. Our Deputy President, Commissar Floyd Shivambu, often refers to the Freedom Charter as one of the important documents that influences the policy positions of the economic freedom fighters. But the point that needs to be made is that the ANC has fundamentally deviated from those original liberation policy positions. It has actually destroyed its ideological roots in that liberation history. It no longer stands for those ideals. So the economic freedom fighters has left the ANC because the ANC has betrayed the fundamental ideals for economic liberation in our lifetime. And those issues were articulated by the leadership of the ANC Youth League when Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu and others who are now in the EFF were the leadership of the ANC Youth League. You can go historically and Google those videos and you hear the messages, the same messages that resonate now in the policies of the economic freedom fighters, the same messages that are set out in the 7 cardinal non-negotiable pillars of the EFF in its founding document. And that founding document obviously resulted out of those battles that were being fought when the Youth League leadership was still in the ANC. So I don't think when we talk now about coming together in a possible coalition, that we are talking about saving the ANC. We're simply saying that the African National Congress can still, in terms of its history, be considered to be a party with some progressive resonances. We believe that they've betrayed it. We believe that we can enter into some kind of coalition with them in order to pursue our ideals. But it doesn't mean that we are there to save the ANC. Whether the EFF was formed in 2013 or not formed, the ANC would have been destroyed. Because the main reason for the destruction of the African National Congress is the ANC itself. So we can enter into a coalition, also with the ANC, pursuing our ideals singularly, not with the intention to save the ANC. And during that coalition period, I can assure you, the ANC will continue to deteriorate. The ANC will continue to disintegrate. And eventually it will disappear from this progressive agenda. This is not a principled position in order to try and save the foremost, the erstwhile national liberation movement. No ways. It is simply a strategy in order to advance our ideological position for a progressive transformation of this economy along the lines of the original liberation ideals, which are set out now in the 7 cardinal pillars of the economic freedom fighters.
And you don't see this, exactly what you've said, as being the reason why the ANC are not speaking to you in terms of coalitions. Because you've outlined exactly this. We don't really like you. We see you dying. We just want to use you to get to where we want to be, which is to take over your position. Therefore,
well, we appeal to the better elements, if they are still such, within the ANC, to say, let's follow a progressive agenda. Because the counter-argument of what you've just presented to me is an acknowledgement, then, if that is the reason why the ANC doesn't want to talk to us, an acknowledgement by the ANC that they have become a reactionary comprador party, yes, and that they no longer stand for the liberation ideals.
Yeah, or
now, all I can say to you is whether the ANC like it or not, they are in a bind. They are in a fundamentally untenable coalition now, which is in so many contradictions, with so much stress that is going to continue, and also because of the personality of Helen Zille, she is nicely going to help on along that stress, that they will collapse. Watch it. The coalition that exists now is not going to hold. And then again, I'm not asking for the ANC to like any one of us. The reality of the fact is that the voters have given the ANC a massive clap. The voters have made the ANC a minority party. So they will need some people, some other parties to work with when this coalition collapses. And who will be there for them? We will be ready, but on the basis of our principles, not compromising them, on the basis of that letter that I've referred to earlier, that document that was made public by Commissar Marshal Dlamini. These are the principles that we will pursue in any coalition with the ANC. Not to save the ANC. That's not the objective. But to grow our ideals and the objectives that we stand for. And if we can do it together with the MK party and with ATM and other small progressive parties, brilliant.
Yeah.
Let's do it together.
So now, Carl, you talk about clubs. I'm about to get 2 clubs if I don't do, one is going to be from our producer. If we don't, we're going to have to wrap up. But I'm going to get a huge clap in the comments if I don't ask about VBS.
Okay.
Right? And the impact on that, and whether this in any way compromises your, I hate calling anybody a commander-in-chief. I was forced to do that once before in my life. Didn't enjoy it much. But the role of Julius Malema
that's just an attitude.
And Floyd Shivambu, right?
Julius Malema is the president and commander-in-chief of the EFF.
Good for him.
And
okay.
that, whether you like it or not, you have to accept it because that is a reality.
Can I just call him the leader?
The EFF.
Do I have to call him the commander?
I call him my commander-in-chief.
He's your commander-in-chief. He's okay, so the leader of the EFF and his deputy, who seem to be, names crop up with VBS. Is there something there, or is this just a media fabrication?
Mike, I'm not even going to go into the details because this has been going on forever. There is no case. It is a lot of propaganda. There is never going to be a case against the commander-in-chief of the EFF, Julius Malema, and the deputy president of the EFF, Floyd Shivambu. This is propaganda.
Yeah.
I ask myself, when you say to me that you're going to get a huge clap from your audience and on the comments, why you don't get also a huge clap that you don't ask me about how does Phala Phala continue to impact on the legitimacy of Cyril Ramaphosa to be the leader of this farcical government of national unity? Because what we need to ask ourselves is, the lack of evidence that there is with regards to VBS and the commander-in-chief of the EFF and the deputy president of the EFF is starkly different from the overwhelming amount of evidence that had been presented to the independent judicial committee that presented a report under Mr. Justice Noble to Parliament, which said that Cyril Ramaphosa has, and remember, Mr. Justice Noble used a very specific, deliberate word. He says he's got a serious, and it was printed in bold cursive letters, a serious prima facie case to answer. Why don't we talk about that? Those are the facts. Those are the realities. We have a president today which is deeply, deeply compromised and will use the majority, when they still had the majority, together with the DA, in the previous 6 administration, who used that to repress a very important, fundamental report that was presented to Parliament. Those issues must be addressed.
I fully assure you agree. But now here we go again, you and I, because we haven't discussed Gauteng, we haven't discussed the mess that is Parliament, we haven't discussed a whole heap of things. But unfortunately, Our time is done. So, Carl, sorry, you're going to get another call from me because there has to be a follow-up because we've got so much to talk about.
I'm always happy to talk. The one thing that I don't mind, I don't feel insecure in the ideals that I stand for. I don't feel insecure in engaging also with people that may not agree with me. And you and I both know, Mike, that you on many fundamental issues disagree with me. The only thing that I always ask for is to have a fair platform and to have my views presented in a fair way.
I hope we've done that for you, Carl.
Except that I complained that one time about how you framed me in the headline.
Well, I stitched Carl Niehaus. Probably vowed never to be back, but clearly I did something right because he's been back. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this, thank you so much. Support PACE, subscribe to the channel. Carl, thank you once again.
You, Mike.
We'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Thank you very much.
Okay. No, I never said I won't come back.